We've just seen the film Argo of the official section, and we're now going to hold the press conference. This is, as I was saying, the Argo, the press conference for the film Argo. Please stop using your flashes once you've sat down. And we've got with us the director and Ben Affleck, and the actor Alan Arkin. Okay, I hope both of you gentlemen can hear me. Is that okay? Good. That's the way it goes. Okay, there's a question in the back there. Okay, please go ahead. There should be a volume control. Now, can you hear me, Mr. Arkin? Good. Hi, good morning or good afternoon. The question is for Ben Affleck. Please stand up so we can see who you are. Okay, the question's for Ben Affleck. This is your third film. The parts that involve Mr. Arkin and Goodman, they played like a comedy role. How did you confront that? Because they both made us laugh throughout the film. How did you confront the directing of them through those scenes?
The thing about the movie is that it has these sort of three competing tones, as the gentleman pointed out, and one of which is kind of a satire. It's a comic anyway, and so I thought, well, this could potentially sort of destroy the seriousness of the later part of the movie when you ask the audience to really take seriously the jeopardy of the house guests, and if the comedy has eaten away the fabric of the reality, it would be a problem. So I got really lucky, and I got two actors who are, I don't want to say who can play comedy, but are also so real and so grounded that it never seemed silly or like they were winking at the audience. No matter what they were asked to say, it felt very real. And so, both Alan and John Goodman, I think, kind of saved that. I was going to cut out jokes if I thought they were if they undermined the movie, but I didn't have to cut any of them out, and they play great, and they get laughs, and still it feels quite realistic, and I think that's a credit to Mr. Arkin and Mr. Goodman.
Hi, my question's for the director. At the end section at the airport, it seems that there's a bit more fiction because you do want to create a bit of tension. How realistic and how much fiction is there in those last scenes? And also a question is, one of the scenes in the archive room, there's a brand which said A150. I don't know whether that's a certain reference to anything at all in the film or not.
Yes, the end is definitely the part of the movie that's the most fictionalized. I mean, as you can imagine, very few real-life events conform to neatly to a three-act structure. So when you're trying to tell one of these stories, you can't really do a docudrama. You have to create and add tension and pace where maybe in true life things took a bit longer to happen and so forth. And so creating a climax to sort of externalize the sense of jeopardy and the fear and the tension that these house guests had. In real life, they went into the they went through all those checkpoints as they do in the movie, and they went into the waiting room, and their plane was having repairs, and so they sort of sat there, nervously sweating it out. And, while they were being, almost caught, but they didn't know that. So in order to sort of externalize that drama and to have something cool for the trailer, we put in this car chase and stuff. But what was really important to me, because these are issues that are really close to what's happening and were important then and are important now, and because this is based on the lives of people who are still alive, was that I hew as meticulously as possible to the details of their lives and to make sure that I get the central thrust of the story, which is these people were taken in they left the American embassy, taken in by the Canadians. The CIA came and took them out under the aegis of being a movie crew, that I maintain the truth and the integrity of that. The second part of the question I didn't understand about the numbers on the...
In the archives it said something like AR105. In the archive room, there's a brand which says A150 referring to the archives. I would not to know whether it was an... what he means, it's very similar to Argo, and it says AR150. Is that the reason?
It wasn't similar to Argo. Yeah, it was just arbitrary. Like, you found more meaning in the movie than I did.
Sí, quería preguntarte por la relación.
Yes, the film is very closely related to the geopolitical situation now, and also to the Hollywood world. It says yes to Hollywood and indirectly to what's happening now. What do you think? It's quite similar to the case scenario now, and saying yes to Hollywood to do something like you did.
When I made this movie, I had hoped that the resonance would be about the unintended consequences of revolution. The consequences of the Shahs being overthrown and this Iranian, kind of Stalinist regime that took over being the same regime that's there now. And, we had the Arab Spring and the Green Revolution. And so, bless you. So that's what I thought of as that would be the connections. I had no way of anticipating the subsequent tragedies, which are, I think everyone recognizes as deplorable and terrible, and it just wasn't something that I saw as relating to the movie at all, except for the fact that this movie really does pay tribute to diplomats, to people who go overseas and serve their country in the diplomatic corps and the foreign service and whatever it's called in whatever country, and you see that, in fact, oftentimes they're putting themselves in jeopardy. The movie was always meant to be a tribute to those folks. And now, tragically, we've had an example of why, in fact, they're deserving of this kind of tribute, because it is quite a dangerous way of a job, and involves a lot of sacrifice, sometimes even the ultimate sacrifice.
Buenos días.
Good morning. Congratulations for the film. I would like to ask Mr. Arkin how you created the chemistry with Mr. Goodman, and also how you see Ben Affleck as an actor and a director in this film. And also to Mr. Affleck, I'd like to ask you, how was the relationship with the real character that you played or portrayed in the film?
They went on so long, I forgot the first part.
Your relationship and how you did the scenes with Mr. Goodman, and how did that chemistry work? The chemistry with...
Once in a while, you look at the screen and you say, that's somebody I'd like to work with, and I've had that feeling. I had never met John Goodman. The minute I met him, we didn't meet until we got on the stage together. The minute I met him, I felt comfortable with him. We've become friends. We seem to have a similar approach to our work, and we like the same music. We just have a lot in common, and he's become a friend, which I guess Ben intuited somehow. I guess he felt that we would get along well together, and we did. It happens every great once in a while, and I'm very glad it did.
In terms of Tony and getting to know Tony, he was available to us during the writing, and Chris Terry was writing a screenplay, and when I came in and worked with Chris, and he was around during production. In fact, he does a cameo getting onto walking into Dulles Airport. And he was up at our screening in Toronto. He's been very supportive, and he's been a huge asset of ours in the movie. And he and his wife and their family. It's just been really nice to have them around, because you make a movie that celebrates somebody. It's nice to have them there to see that validation.
Roxana from C5M from Argentina. I want to ask you, why did you decide to talk about this issue, about this political issue in this movie?
Well, it's really more about the script. I got the script. I thought it was an excellent drama, made even more interesting by the fact that it was based on true events. It was the kind of thing where you never would believe the story if it weren't based on true events. And I thought it could attract a really good cast. I liked the fact that it had a number of tones, that it was tense and serious and comic. I liked the fact that it seemed still timely in the sense that, the way in which we get involved in the affairs of other countries and the tangles that creates, and the heroism that you see sometimes. And I also, I get to work with really good partners. George Clooney and Grant Heslov are great, filmmakers, and so they're really good producing partners. And Warner Brothers has been very good to me and allowed me to make the kinds of movies that I want to make, and so I was excited to get a chance to work with them again.
My question is, for you, Ben, John Garcia is my name. I'm an actor, and I would like to know, what are the two keys to direct and to perform and be an actor at the same time? I'm also presenting a new project as a director and as an actor, say, well, what are the secrets? What are the two keys to do both things well at the same time?
If I knew the answer to that, I couldn't tell you. To me, the only thing that I've learned is to hire people who are really smart and who are better than you are, and to benefit from working with them, and to work very hard yourself, and to be humble so that you're in a position to learn and get better. It's really all I got, man. But good luck with your project.
Hello. Congratulations for the job. And Ben, I want to know what's more comfortable, wearing the beard and that hair, or looking the way you look right now? It was a great transformation.
I hated that hair. My kids hated it more than anything. They were begging me to shave, I said, I got to keep this for my work. My daughter said, Dad, what kind of work would want you to keep that beard? This is from the mouth of babes. It was unpleasant, but Alan assured me that was the real look. He somehow got away with keeping this exact same look, but I was glad to get rid of mine.
Hi, congrats on the movie. I wanted to ask, this movie reminds us of all movies during the 70s and the 80s, like thrillers like 3 Days of the Condor. Did you have those kinds of movies in mind when you read the script and you knew you wanted to do that kind of movie? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This movie had the advantage of a really neat thing where I got to basically copy the style of some of my favorite movies from an era of American filmmaking that I think is one of the best, if not the best. So I could sort of nakedly steal from those movies with the excuse that, by shooting our movie in the style of the 70s, the audience would further be convinced that it was a story that was genuinely taking place in that period. So by borrowing from everything from, All the President's Men to Cassavetes, Killing of a Chinese Bookie, or Costa Gravis, and and also movies like Battle of Algiers and stuff like that. But I was able to. It was fun to really experiment with that style of movie. And if I thought people were bored by it or thought it wasn't very good, I could say, well, no, I knew that. I was just copying.
Yes, my question is, for Ben Affleck, I'm interested in one aspect of the domestic policies of the U.S. vis-a-vis the film. That is, we know that the case of the hostage crisis had a lot to do with Jimmy Carter losing the elections and changing, and then Reagan being elected as president. The fact that the crisis wasn't resolved during Carter's mandate. In the film, I have the intuition that there's a certain recognition to the fact that it had to be maintained under silence, that rescue, which would have been politically profitable for Carter. My curiosity is whether you've had the occasion or if you talked to Jimmy Carter about this, because if he'd have known this, perhaps, he would have been president also in 1980. He would have been re-elected, if you get what I'm saying. He could have used it politically in his favor.
We did interview President Carter. His voice is at the end of the movie, sort of faintly, and he says something along the lines of what you say, which is if he could have taken credit for this mission, had this big international success story, it might have helped him politically because he was in a very tough spot. Kennedy was running a primary challenge against him, and Reagan was really gaining ground from the Republican side. So, yeah, I'm sure, in fact, he said that he wished he had been able to tell people about it. Also, subsequently, they did an operation called Eagle Claw, which failed. A number of Americans were killed in attempted rescue, and he didn't get any of the hostages out until Khomeini was so angry at Carter that he didn't release the hostages until Reagan's inauguration day. So Carter definitely came out politically on the short end of the stick, in our story and history.
A mí la película...
I'm over here of the left, the film. I think it, albeit it looks very realistic and based upon real facts, in its language and directing is typically American. You represent the hero, or the shall we say the hero and leading actor, typical leading actor of American film. In your inspiration, is it always North America when you have your inspiration and when you work, but you always work in films that you direct? This is a great character that you're portraying. You're doing this because of the box office, or are you thinking that the main character is the basic issue and the crux of the matter that fills up the whole film, if you catch what I'm saying? Are you using it yourself as a box office hero, or do you think that that's the main issue? You needed a big solid character? It was difficult to translate, sorry.
Difficult to understand also. What I can say is it's not meant to be deliberately, well, I guess it is North American naturally. I come from the school of filmmaking that, I grew up around, although I looked to Alejandro González Iñárritu for actually all three of my movies. I think he does realism as well as anybody does it, and he does it internationally in particular. Obviously he's from Mexico, which is North America as well, but it's slightly different cinematic tradition. His cinematographer Rodrigo Prieto shot this movie, and again I wanted to have that sense of internationalism somehow within the movie. We created different looks, some of which were quite atypical for North American filmmaking. Particularly, we shot 2perf with a very punchy, high contrast stock for all the Iranian stuff, because I want to keep the audience at a distance. Certainly for North American audiences or American audience, they look at that and they don't see anything familiar to them. As far as myself as a protagonist and whether or not that's typical of America, I'm not sure. I think you won't see another protagonist with that hairdo for some time. Other than that, it definitely does follow the tradition of the sort of traditional protagonist, except that he has what was important to me was to see that this was actually a real person and not a slick person and not a magically cool person, but somebody who had a wife and family who had to be away from them and, kind of carried his lunch to work and belied some of these assumptions we have about the CIA, at least to me.
Hi, I have a question for Mr. Arkin. I'd like to know if the Hollywood his character portrays was the real Hollywood in the 70s.
That's a kind of generic question that I don't know how to answer. Well, I know individuals. I don't know generic. I don't understand generic. I have met producers like that. I have met producers that were crazier than that. I've met producers that were dumber than that. I've also met producers who were geniuses. I've met producers who were deeply kind, who were imaginative, who were courageous. It's all kinds. So the minute I hear typical, my mind turns off. I can't act typical. I can act a specific person. I don't know what typical is. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the best I can do.
My question for the director of the film, I would like to know whether at a given time you wanted to get in touch with the Iranian government to give more realism to the film and to shoot it on location in Iran. If such is the case, what was the answer of the Iranian government?
Yeah, I would have loved to go to Iran. I would have loved to shoot in Iran. That would have been just much more realistic, naturally. And I would have loved, ultimately, I even tried to just send somebody or get a B cameraman or get filmmakers in Iran who would shoot some B-roll for me that I could use for the visual effects. I mean, if for no other reason than it costs us a fortune to build shots around the Azadi Monument and, like buses going by. Most movies spend all that money on visual effects, and it's like dragons fighting, cars that turn into robots. We spent all that money on just 70s cars going around a traffic circle. But it was really, unfortunately I wasn't able to. I wasn't supported by anybody, including the State Department, people just thought it was a bad idea, and that once I got there I would be limited in terms of what I'd be able to see. And I ultimately found out that that was true because when I made contact through some Iranian filmmakers who were incredible, they have an incredible filmmaking tradition there, and I know some Iranian filmmakers, they said to me, just forget it. There's no chance. Maybe if the Greens had, taken over, but now you're completely out of luck. Which is too bad. It's a population of people that's really excited about Western culture. Western culture has probably the most hold on any Middle Eastern country. Iranians probably view Western culture more favorably than any other Middle Eastern country, and so I thought a chance would be to kind of get some traction, but I was not able to, and it's one of the things I really regret.
Hola, buenas. Me ha llamado mucho la atención.
Hi, at the beginning of the film, with comic vignettes, with cartoon, sort of like cartoon drawings, if you get what I'm saying, comics, but it starts up with something, it gets very serious later, but it's not very realistic because comics are obviously not real, but it's quite curious because later on things get quite real, if you get what I'm saying.
The whole point of that, there were 2 points to that. One was to give the audience a context historically about the movie that they were seeing, so that you don't just start off in an embassy and see people going crazy and make assumptions about it based on either current headlines or things that they've heard or things that they've seen in the past, but to rather ground you specifically in this area with this history, because I thought it would help people enjoy the understanding more, to have a more thorough, enjoy the movie more, to have a more thorough understanding of it, and help to reduce bias, which I think is a killer in drama and in life. I also wanted to do kind of what you suggested, which is fuse the tones. Tell the audience, listen, you're going to see a movie that's going to involve hard history, some very tense stuff that involves, some very dangerous and hard-hitting stuff, as well as this, slightly fantastical, satirical Hollywood thing. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll fuse those at the beginning of the movie, and so the audience will see both of these tones together. They may not understand it, but when they get later on to the part that Alan's in, it'll fit into the subconscious expectation that I've seeded in the prologue. Either that, or they'll just think it's silly.
Hello, hi, it's a question for Ben. Ben, I already watched twice the movie at the Toronto Film Festival, and it was absolutely brilliant. I would like to ask you how difficult it was for you directing yourself. Was the kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde experience for you? And on the other hand, would it be fun for you to direct the original Argo that was never made? Thank you so much.
That I would love to make. If he would produce it, I would make it. That was one of the most fun days that I had, and I just, fire the thrusters and the girl with the outfit, it was seemed like so much more fun all of a sudden than, rioting people in Turkey. What was the other part of the question? Oh, yeah, directing myself. There's 2 things. One,
he's a lot easier on himself than he is on other people.
That is not true. I shoot a lot of film, and when you're around actors like him or like John, people who you really look up to, you sort of naturally elevate what you're doing because you don't want to be embarrassed in front of these great actors. So I used the fear of humiliation as well as just gave myself 20, 30 takes. Alan got 1 or 2. He was just good, so we could move right on from there.
Sí. Mi pregunta es para Ben Affleck.
Question for Ben Affleck. This year, as the best foreign film, a film was won, an Iranian film won the film festival. I would like to know whether cinema can be a good way of making 2 countries come together that are now confronted. Iran on the Axis of Evil, I think was the name of the film. I would know the Iranian girl who works at the embassy, I would like to know whether that was a real character in real life or not. Thank you very much.
Is that a real character? The woman that works at the embassy, I can't pronounce her name, Nilafar Ektab something. She's the vice president of Iran now. She's one of the few of that core group of people who took hostages that still embraces it. Most of them sort of shy away from taking responsibility, but she's still very, very gung-ho. They called her Tehran Mary at the time. When we walk in, you see the television in the kitchen. That's the real woman. And then when we cut to the live shot of her, the 35 millimeter shot of her, that's somebody, dressed up like her, doing her voice, all that stuff. What was the other part of the question?
Two countries coming together, do you think?
The most moving part of the Academy Awards to me last year, I think it was when A Separation won, and they went up and accepted their award, and one had the electric sense that something could really be accomplished. That two peoples could see one another as human beings through art, and it was an extraordinary feeling. I think that that's probably quite a rare thing. Definitely, I asked my friends who are Iranian filmmakers. They said, "Do you think people?" I said, "Do you think people see it in Iran?" He said, "Well, definitely the authorities will see it. They can only smuggle in kind of black market DVDs, so maybe or maybe not." There's definitely a nice celebration of the Canadian co-exercise with the United States on this, which I think is really nice. This collective diplomacy that you see. So it does definitely celebrate that, but that moment that you saw at the Oscars with A Separation, that's a once in a lifetime thing to be part of, so it was pretty extraordinary to watch, and so it's an example that this can happen, but it's something to aspire to.
A question for Alan Arkin. In the film, there's a lot of nostalgia for the 1970s cinema that you lived firsthand, obviously lived through firsthand. What has varied in that world of Hollywood of the 1970s to the present moment? What's changed?
I'm a lot older. What's changed? I don't know how to answer the question. I don't know what's changed. I can't answer the question. I'm sorry. I've cast the pole over the proceedings.
Yeah, thanks, man. You're encouraging him to ask you. The sideburns are shorter. There's less. I think there's less. There was a kind of I can't a little bit answer. There was a kind of insane freedom in the late 60s and 70s where anybody could direct a movie. If you had never directed a movie, you had a better shot at directing a movie than if you had directed a movie. So they were letting anybody do anything that time. People were writing movies that had never written movies before, directing movies that had never directed, and there was a kind of open sense of wild abandon. I have no idea what came out of, but that is very much gone now, I think. It's harder and harder to get independent films done now. There's a kind of squeeze on all sorts of films that had enormous freedom 40 years ago. They even allowed me to direct a movie 40 years ago. And not only that, but they gave me absolute carte blanche. I didn't have a huge budget, but I did a movie and they left me completely alone. And I made my movie, showed the studio, and they released it exactly the way I made it. It was kind of a miraculous experience. That I know for me would never happen now. And most of the people I know would not happen that way. So there I answered the question. You made it. You did great.
Muy bien,
to Ben. Ben, just wanted to ask you, it seems like years ago when you first launched The Good Will Hunting, what are your memories from that movie? And seeing from the perspective of nowadays, what would you underline of that movie?
That was a wonderful kind of new, exciting time. I was 25 or something, which at the time I thought I was very old. Now it just seems like almost like a kid, but it was fun. It was really fun. I sort of broke in. I thought, I thought they were all going to be like that. The next movie I'd probably win the Academy Award too. Just keep going. It just seemed like all this stuff was happening, as they say, happening very fast. In truth, it just was fun. It just was really fun. We enjoyed it. We had a good time. I didn't quite understand how complicated life was going to all be as I moved down the road. But at least I was able to kind of enjoy it. And it was a very pure way of making a movie. And that's the lesson that stayed with me, was that we really made it out of what we thought would be fun and what we thought would be good just to us. There wasn't this kind of self-consciousness about, is so-and-so going to like it? Is so-and-so going to like it? A little bit of like what Alan talked about, being able to do it kind of unmolested and present it and hope for the best. And that was a great feeling, and it was a lot of fun. And I was still working with the friends, people I grew up with, not just Matt, but a lot of people from home. It was almost like a home movie in that sense. It was a lot of fun.
Hi, I would like to ask Ben Affleck whether the film has been changed in the editing room vis-a-vis the script. This is something because a lot of editing goes on and Alan Arkin, I would like to know whether you notice when the director is an actor, he's a colleague who works with you, for better or for worse.
Go first, and then Alan can answer. I think that trying to speaking of being a colleague, I mean, it's nice to kind of, it's actually nice to have a colleague whose eyes you can look in and you can sort of tell without asking them if they think your take was good or not. But in terms of the editing room, I think editing rooms are where movies are made. For me, it's at least where I do it. I know there's some directors who, like they say, cut in camera, and they have these very specific ideas of exactly how it's going to be, and it turns out like that. I wish I was that good, but I sort of am more of a harvester and accumulator. I take it back to the editing room, and that's, in the sort of sober, quiet, dark of that room, where you don't have as much pressure. I kind of I've put it together, and in there, I definitely did, as probably the same amount of cutting and changing as I did on my other two movies, which is a fair amount because I overshoot and I kind of work with the intention of cutting around it later, so I have extra stuff, and and I experiment with the movie a lot there.
What?
They were asking what it's like to work with a colleague.
That was the question to me?
Yeah.
Is that
a colleague and a director at the same time, for better or for worse, your answer?
It was very easy. Ben is an exacting director. When he acted, there was no sense of transition. He just jumped into the scenes, and there's a little bit, the paranoid aspect of me, of which not very much remains anymore, I'm happy to say. But whatever paranoid aspect of me remains, when I was acting in a scene with me, I would sometimes get a look in his eyes. Oh, God, the director's looking at me. He's looking at me as a director. I can see look. But he's a very exacting director, and that exactness remained whether he was acting with me or not. He knows exactly what he wants. Meticulous is a good word, I think.
Seems I saw a question in the back there somewhere. Yes, seems so. A question for Alan Arkin. When you went through the Oscar to the nominations, prior nominations, how did you live every night of the Oscar until you won the Oscar? And how did you? And what's your next project as an actor or director, Ben, Mr. Arkin? The prior, the Oscar you won and the one subsequently you didn't win. How did you live up those nights leading up to the Oscar Awards?
Talking to me?
Yeah. Yes, I'm talking to you.
How did I win? Well, it never occurred to me that I would win. I didn't take it serious. The nomination, what I've said forever, and I really mean it. I know a lot of people say it because you're supposed to say it, but I really mean it. I look back and I say, what of any joy have I ever gotten out of any of this, and any of the awards? And the only I can say with full honesty that the only real joy I have gotten out of any of it is the moment of nomination. because it's completely unexpected, it's completely surprising, and you're put together with a group of people who mostly you admire a lot. And that's inclusive, and it's beautiful, and my understanding of the universe is that it's ultimately an inclusive experience, the universe. And I think more and more the physicists are agreeing with that idea, that everything is connected to everything else. In fact, you can't even define anything in the world, in the universe, unless you define it in conjunction with something else. Everything else is exclusive, and that is painful. When you win, you start thinking you're special for a little while, and you think something great is going to happen, some kind of subconscious dream that you've had that never comes to fruition and can't come to fruition. And if you lose, you think you're a failure, which is also nonsense, because you got a nomination, which is not a failure. The actual moment of winning, people ask me about that, and I say, I can't tell you because I wasn't there. The minute they mentioned my name, I left my body and went somewhere else. My mind didn't come back for about a week, and I came back into my body, and somebody told me I had won. So it was a completely anonymous experience. Does that answer your question?
As far as me, I don't know what I'm doing next. Much less interesting answer than Alan's, but the truth.
It's very interesting to me. I find it fascinating.
Hola.
Hi. Hi. Argo, the ending, it seems to me a bit, it's missing a bit of a critical side to it. Critical towards the U.S. government. At the beginning, the narrative says that the people responsible in part are the U.S., mostly because, and they are defending that asshole who has a throne, who's the Shah, and then there's an exaltation which is a bit patriotic at the end of the day. Has that been a feeling that you've really wanted to show as such, or is it due to the Oscars that you may win? That's what you said.
I'm not blaming you, sir.
Careful. It was a trick question.
The translator was like, I can't, that's what she said. You know,
careful what you're saying.
I'm always careful. I meant to present these things as facts. You know, I was not trying to urge or edge the audience in any one way. I have friends who are Democrats and who are Republicans. I have friends who are Americans and who live internationally. And I wanted all those people to be, no, not you. I wanted all those people to be able to watch the movie and maybe draw different conclusions from it and maybe feel different ways, but have them be watching something that's factual. So yes, it's factual that the U.S. and Great Britain got involved in the international affairs of Iran primarily over oil, and yes, it's true that they overthrew Mossadegh, and yes, it's true that they installed the Shah. But it doesn't mean that also it follows that everything that the United States does is has some pernicious effect on another country or place, and that in fact, on a very individual level, this guy who is, I think, emblematic for folks who work quite hard and do a very good job, does do something heroic to save other lives. And I think the story of people who put themselves on the line for others is quite beautiful. I don't view it as necessarily jingoistic or anything other than just a story about that kind of ennobles us all, because it demonstrates what we're willing to do for one another. As people, I like Renoir as my favorite director because he just seems fundamentally humanist, and so I guess that's what I was trying to do. Not be Renoir, let's face it, I got a long way to go, but the humanism in that work is something that I wanted to work with.
But nicely done. I got you out of it very, very beautifully.
Thank you very much.
I was very impressed with the Renoir.
Always go to Renoir.
Illusion.
Another question that I would like to ask you is that a few months ago, at the end of last year, at the beginning of this year, the possibility was made that you may direct The Stand, the adaptation by Stephen King. Are you is that possibility still in your head, or what's going on there?
Yeah, I still like the possibility. It's definitely still in my head. It's a very, very difficult book to adapt. It's very long. Right now, the script that is there is very long, and not ready to be a movie. As these things happen, you work on these scripts for a long time, and I try to work on more than one at a time because inevitably most of them are never good enough to be made into a movie. I'm hoping this one is. I like the idea of it. I like the idea of starting over as a civilization and what would we do, that question. But so far, not ready.
De la Liga de la Justicia ni hablar.
And let's not even talk about the League of Justice, right?
To talk about it. Thank you.
Muy bien, yo creo que ha sido una...
Okay, thank you very much. It's been a very interesting press conference. We've got to finish here. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you.